Hello good people, you are welcome back to your favorite channel. Today's video will be different. We are going to talk about a man that is generally believed to be more evil and dangerous than the devil himself. Some of you must have come across the name Jeffrey Dahmer. Following the recent series released by Netflix about this notorious serial killer, who famously killed and ate young men, mostly blacks. The show was subjected to criticism almost immediately after its release. Much of the discussion has focused on the way in which systemic racism allowed Dahmer to continue killing young men. However, it is important you know that Netflix didn't tell you everything. There are so many things about Dahmer that you still don't know yet. Not until you know these things, you can't fully say you know everything about this Milwaukee cannibal, Jeffrey Dahmer. Over the years, there have been so many different stories about Jeff Dahmer from different newspapers, blogs, websites, and YouTube channels, but trust me, not everything you see out there is the truth. Here's the true story of Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer who captivated America, and how he died. Everything you see here is based on facts. Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He was raised by his mother and grandmother after his father left them when he was just 2 years old. His grandmother had bipolar disorder and would often leave him alone for days, while she went out drinking with friends or shopping for antiques. While his own mother Joyce, a teletype machine instructor, suffered depression and substance issues. Dahmer attended West Division High School in Milwaukee and was regarded as somewhat of an outcast, because he was openly gay and did not know how to socialize with his peers. He served 10 months in prison for various crimes at the age of 18, after being convicted of events related to the robbery of a couple at gunpoint. Jeff Dahmer committed his first murder when he was 18. He had been driving when 19-year-old Stephen Hicks, who was heading to a rock concert at Chippewa Lake Park in Ohio, decided to hitchhike with him. As they drove, Jeffrey brought up the idea of Stephen going with him to his house to have a few drinks, which they did. After drinking, Stephen told Jeffrey that he wanted to leave, but Jeffrey didn't want him to. Turned out that Jeffrey was hoping he would act on his feelings for Stephen. Seeing as he couldn't stop Stephen from leaving, Jeffrey used a 10-pound dumbbell to strike Stephen twice on the back of the head. As soon as he passed out, Jeffrey used the bar of the dumbbell to strangle him. The next day, Jeffrey dismembered Stephen's corpse and buried the parts of his body in his backyard. But because he didn't want to leave the evidence behind, he dug up Stephen's body weeks after, peeled the flesh off the bones and dissolved it in acid. He then flushed the output down the toilet, before crushing the bones with a sledgehammer and spreading them around his backyard. After Jeffrey killed Stephen, he went on to kill his next 4 victims. 25-year-old Stephen Twomey, 14-year-old James Docks, 22-year-old Richard Guerrero, and 24-year-old Anthony Sears. This was between 1987 and 1988. In the years of 1989 and 1991, Jeffrey met and murdered his remaining 12 victims. And his last victim was 25-year-old Joseph Breedhoff. To have been convicted of 15 counts of first-degree murder and receive a sentence of 900 years in prison, can only imagine the things Jeffrey Dahmer must have done. Before he was eventually caught and arrested, Jeffrey would regularly pick up male prostitutes, he drugged them, and when they get unconscious he would strangle them to death. Sometimes, he'd pose with the dead bodies, sometimes he would sleep with their corpses, and often he would take photos with them. To get rid of the dead bodies in his apartment, Jeffrey bought a large tank, filled it with acid, and threw the torsos of his victims into it. He also cooked the severed body parts and constantly ate them. Hence the nickname Milwaukee Cannibal. So ridiculous. Jeffrey Dahmer is the devil himself, and the crimes he committed are so evil and cruel, that life imprisonment no longer felt like the right punishment for him. Dahmer's atrocious crimes not only shocked a nation, but his actions have perplexed medical science. He may have been a monster, but Dahmer was also soft-spoken, intelligent, and as strange as it sounds, he came across as a likable guy. That's perhaps one reason why it took so long to arrest him. He was a mastermind when it came to concealing his crimes. It was as if Dahmer was invisible, untouchable. Then in 1991 something straight out of the darkest kind of horror story happened. Dahmer had lured a teenager to his apartment. This time, he not only subdued the guy with drinks and pills, but when the victim was almost out, he drilled a hole in his skull and injected hydrochloric acid into the hole. It was Dahmer's belief that by putting the acid into the so-called executive suit, the part of the brain called the frontal cortex, he could turn him into a living zombie. He could have someone forever, but that person wouldn't rot like all his other victims. He left the young man alone on the couch in his zombified state, drank some more beers, and then went to a bar. When he returned home, he hoped his zombie would still be there. He wasn't. Dahmer looked for him and then saw 3 women standing over him as he crouched on the street, looking awfully worse for wear. Dahmer tried to convince the women he was the youth's friend, but they knew something was wrong. They told Dahmer they'd called the cops. The police turned up quite quickly, but after hearing Dahmer tell them he was the boyfriend of the youth, they believed him. The cops walked Dahmer and the allegedly drunk boy back to his apartment, where one of the police noticed a really foul odor. Unknowingly to them, it was the decomposing body of a previous victim. When the cops were gone, Dahmer injected more hydrochloric acid into the boy's head. This time it killed him. He killed again, and he took his trophies. He kept on killing people. He didn't stop. He just couldn't stop. But as they say, everything comes to an end. In Jeffrey's case, he just wasn't expecting it. He was eventually caught on July 22, 1991, after he offered 3 men $100 at a bar to come with him back to his apartment to pose for nude photographs. One of the 3 men, Tracy Edwards, agreed to the offer. When he entered Dahmer's apartment, Edwards smelled a foul odor and noticed several boxes of hydrochloric acid on the floor, which Dahmer told him he used for cleaning bricks. Edwards didn't believe that. He knew something was wrong. He was fortunate enough to get out of the apartment and run for his dear life. While running down the street, he stopped a police car and told the police officer how he felt something wasn't right about Jeffrey. The police officer Edwards spoke to called for backup, and together with other cops who responded to his call, they raided Jeffrey's apartment. To their sheer horror, the authorities found several pictures of severed body parts all over the apartment, about 4 or 5 decapitated heads in Jeffrey's freezer, dismembered body parts in both pots and pans. They also found in a large tank the torsos Jeffrey had dissolved using acid. It looked more like a museum than a crime scene. Jeffrey was immediately arrested and taken into police custody. His day of reckoning had come. During his trial, he pled guilty by reason of insanity, but he was deemed legally sane at his trial. At the end of his largely publicized trial on February 17, 1992, Jeffrey Dahmer was convicted of 15 murders and was sentenced to 15 terms of life imprisonment. The nature of Jeffrey's crimes placed him in people's bad books. Just over 2 years into his sentence, on the morning of the 28th of November 1998, Jeffrey Dahmer and 2 other inmates walked into the toilet block for cleaning duties. Dahmer and one of the other inmates never came out. It was later reported that Jeffrey Dahmer and one other inmate had been stabbed to death by a fellow inmate, Christopher Scarver. Christopher Scarver, who was also serving a life sentence for murder, but his crimes are not as gruesome as Jeff's. When Scarver was asked why he did what he did, he claimed that he was the chosen one and that he had to do it. For a lot of Americans, it was a fitting end to a terrible story. And that brings us to the end of this video. If you enjoyed watching today's video, please click the like button on your screen and don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more interesting videos like this. Now you need to watch that video on your screen. Check out the top 5 prisoners who are more evil than Jeffrey Dahmer. See you there.